news out of Moscow. Russian state media now reporting that prominent opposition leader Alexey Navalny, one of President Putin's most persistent and vehement critics, has died in prison at age 47.
In a statement, Russia's Federal Penitentiary Service said Navalny, quote, felt unwell after a walk and almost immediately lost consciousness. The prison service said an investigation is underway to establish the cause of death. Navalny was serving 19 years in an Arctic penal colony on charges of extremism and fraud.
The charges were widely seen as retribution for Navalny's campaigns against election fraud and government corruption in Putin's inner circle. Navalny had said he did not expect to be released during Putin's lifetime. International correspondent Julia Chapman, who spent several years reporting from Moscow, now joins us from London with more. Julie, what more can you tell us about this? This was one of Vladimir Putin's most outspoken critics.
He certainly was, and what we're understanding from his team is that they have heard the reports about his death and are sending a lawyer to the prison colony in the Arctic to confirm them. Of course, this is a long distance away from Moscow. His lawyers were only there as recently as Wednesday, where they waited 6 hours to get access to Navalny. And when they eventually did see him, they were unable to participate in a hearing that was scheduled for that day. So we know he was alive and well as recently as 2 days ago, but his team is verifying the reports we're hearing this morning from Russia's Federal Penitentiary Service, confirming that he is dead. The Kremlin has said they've also been informed about this. They say they don't know what the cause of death is, but they understand that there is an investigation ongoing. Of course, Navalny's health had been fragile for many years. He was poisoned in 2020. He was evacuated to Germany, where he received medical treatment, made a pretty miraculous recovery, and it was confirmed by German investigators that there had been a nerve agent used in his poisoning, something that could only have been acquired by very high up officials or the security services inside Russia. So Navalny certainly had a target on his back for many years. He was one of the most outspoken critics of Vladimir Putin. He carried out many anti-corruption investigations against officials in Putin's inner circle, and he had been warning that he was a target as well, but he always maintained his anti-Putin stance. Even in his most recent court hearing on February 8th, he urged the judges in that court to vote against Vladimir Putin in the upcoming presidential election. So this will certainly be a big loss to the opposition movement in Russia, which has been chipped away at for many years. This could indeed be the final nail in the coffin for it, so to speak, if this is confirmed that Alexei Navalny has indeed died.
Now, when you hear about the manner in which he died and all that you just said about how much of an opposition he was to Vladimir Putin, there's some skepticism when you hear, he felt unwell and then almost immediately lost consciousness. Is there any concern that, despite there being an investigation, that there will not be a real answer as to how he died?
Yes, absolutely. It's very difficult to know what goes on behind closed doors in the very secretive prison system inside Russia. Navalny's allies had warned that there could be targets against him. He had suffered from health problems inside prison, perhaps not surprising, given the nerve agent that he was poisoned with, which would have weakened him several years ago. Prison conditions, of course, are not ideal either. He has struggled to get access to health care while in prison. He was moved to this particular facility only late last year to make access more difficult to his lawyers, which is the belief from his team. So undoubtedly finding out exactly what has happened here is difficult. I imagine that his team are under the impression that this was a deliberate attack against Alexei Navalny. It's not the first time. We saw that Novichok poisoning happen before. So certainly finding out the details is going to be a major challenge. There's not much transparency in Russia as a whole, but nevertheless, particularly in prisons, it's really hard to find out what happens there.
And where he died in that penal colony is known for its harsh conditions, right?
It is indeed, yes. This is one of the toughest penal colonies in Russia. It's a former gulag. It is a very cold part of the country in the far, far north of Russia, the Yamal-Nenets region. We understand from an Instagram post that Navalny published a few months ago via his lawyers that he could feel the cold through the walls, that the conditions there were pretty challenging indeed. But he said that he was maintaining good spirits, nevertheless, that he had a warm, woolly hat to help protect him. He always maintained an upbeat appearance, at least, even though he was facing really difficult conditions throughout his imprisonment, which he expected to go on for many years. He said he did not expect to be released during Vladimir Putin's lifetime. He was due to be serving at least 17 more years behind bars after more charges were added to the original one. So he has faced a huge amount of adversity behind bars, but even before then, when he was met with loads of court challenges over his time as an opposition politician. He'll be remembered inside Russia as the anti-corruption campaigner because of the political landscape, the media landscape in Russia. Not a lot of support, actually, for Alexei Navalny. His supporters are reasonably small in number, but those who do support him will see this as a really big loss and one that indicates that Russia is not becoming any more open anytime soon.
And on that very point, perhaps the biggest question of the moment is, how does this death play within Russia? We all know what kind of leader Vladimir Putin is. Something always happens to his critics. It is not a real justice system as we appreciate it in an actual democracy here. So his death, coupled with the ongoing war in Ukraine and the bodies of more Russian soldiers coming home in a war that is still undefined to a large extent and not going the way Russia wanted it, how does this at all generate public interest or public outcry that would affect Putin at all?
As hard as it is to believe for those of us looking from the outside, it's unlikely to make much of a difference or move the dial at all when it comes to Russian politics. We're very unlikely to see floods of people taking to the streets in protest. Protesting has become very challenging and very dangerous for anybody that is trying to oppose the Kremlin inside Russia. It's always been difficult, but because of the war in Ukraine, now more so than ever, there has been a very little movement when it comes to opening up the political landscape in Russia. There was one opposition candidate who was trying to put his name forward for the upcoming presidential elections and was ultimately blocked, Boris Nadezhdin. But even he, there were theories that even he was a managed candidate approved by the Kremlin to get involved in the running. But so fearful of any kind of critic or opposition is Vladimir Putin that even he wasn't able to run. So the opposition movement in Russia really, really disappearing beyond recognition. And this certainly will be a big loss to the opposition movement. And many of them are, of course, operating outside of Russia because it's already too dangerous to even stay inside the country, as we're seeing.
When it's not a democracy, it is a very different world. International correspondent Julia Chapman reporting on this breaking news overnight. Thank you so much.